Alrighty, so we are excited to have presenting their paper, this group of co-authors paper today on tax incentives and entrepreneurship. Frank, one of the co-authors, is going to be monitoring the chat. Feel free to put questions there, and we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you for having today, and very honored to present our recent research paper, Taxes, Incentives, and Entrepreneurship, Evidence from the Universe of U.S. Startups today. And after the first 5 minutes, please feel free to interrupt me with questions. And you can also type questions in the chat. My co-author, Dr. Frank Fossen, will handle these questions. So this is a joint work with Robert Fairlie, Frank Fossen, and Andrew Johnston. The disclaimer page for the Census Bureau data. So why we do this research? We know entrepreneurs generate positive externalities. In addition to raising welfare for consumer and contributing revenue for public goods, entrepreneurs drive employment growth and wage competition in the market for workers. Indeed, the security of entrepreneurs appear to be a limiting factor in job creation due to the fact that firms can effectively manage only so many workers. So to foster entrepreneurs and their externalities, therefore, government spends billions annually on tax incentives and other policies to encourage those people. Here are the state level subsidy. Maybe I should move. Here are the state level subsidy programs in the United States, and most states just have 1 to 4 subsidy programs over the past 20 years. But in Nevada, we have such like a business tax abatement, personal property tax abatement, and real property tax abatement. Wisconsin, which has the highest number of such incentive programs, they have job tax credits, like business development tax credits, and economic development tax credit program. All these programs are designed to encourage entrepreneurship. But we're curious, which regional policies actually work? If we put all the policies into the same framework, could we compare these policies and find the most effective one? The first research question is, do changes in taxes and incentives affect startup dynamics, including their formation, survival, and growth? The second question, as I mentioned before, which policies are most effective? And the third question is, do employer and non-employer startups respond differently? Let me make a quick distinction between the employer startups and the non-employer startups. Non-employer startups are businesses without paid employees. Think of gig workers, solo entrepreneurs, or freelancers. On the other hand, the employer startups hire workers, making them particularly important for job creation. In the US, one employer startups could create 3 positions for the economy. But so we're curious, do these 2 types of startups respond differently to different policies? And the last question we ask is whether there is evidence of cross-border policy competition. In other words, do startups respond to policy differences across state lines? Like, consider the case of Nevada and California. Nevada has no state-level personal tax personal income tax, while California has one of the highest personal income tax rates in the country. So if this personal tax policy truly matters for entrepreneurship, we could expect to see startups located in Nevada's border counties, particularly those close to California, to take advantage of the more favorable tax environment. So this is our last question. And to figure out these questions, we use newly developed comprehensive startup panel data, CSP. It includes the universe of US startups from 1998 to 2022. This data is pretty cool. This is the first data set of its kind and to allow us to track both non-employer and employer startups. Also, we consider comprehensive set of taxes and incentives in our research. We apply consistent causal methods across policies, enabling comparisons between different policies. Just a quick view for the main findings. For the tax policy effect, we find the tax increases reduce startup numbers and employment, and tax cuts has the symmetric positive effects. For all those tax types, corporate income taxes have the strongest impact. For the incentive policy effect, we find the incentives could boost startup formation and reduce exit, but the effect is asymmetric. Go to the data part. Which variables used in this analysis? For the policy variables, we use the total taxes, corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, and property taxes, sales taxes. For the incentives, we have the total incentives, job creation, tax credits, property tax abatement, R&D credits, research and development, investment tax credits. For the startups outcomes, we focus on the startup formation, like the number of employer and non-employer startups, also the employment created by those startups, the startups closure rate, and the move-out rate. The move-out rate refers to if a startup move from the original state to other states. Here are the data sources. The first is the Comprehensive Startup Panel Data, CSP, is provided by the Census Bureau. This data is at the firm level. We aggregate the firm level data to the county level and match with the policy measures. The policy measures is from the panel database on incentive and taxation, the PDIT data. The PDIT provides state-level information on a broad range of incentives and taxes for an average firm across 33 states, covering the period from 2001 to 2015. These 33 states account for over 90% of the US output, so we think our sample is representative. The PDIT data, what they do, they simulate taxes and incentives by assuming the establishment of a new business. So taxes and incentives for the new businesses are projected over the first 20 years of the operation for such new business. So actually, this is the incentive and tax burden faced by the startups. Also, we get the state personal income tax rates from the tax foundation. Any questions so far? Oh, I think, yeah, Frank will handle it. For the control variables, we use the demographic shares like the share of race, ethnicity, and gender. And also we use the county population sourced from the BEA. But before I go to the methodology, let's take some case statistics. In United States, the total startups annually is 4.1 million. Among all these startups, non-employers account for 89%, and the employer startups account for 11%. So non-employer startups actually is the majority of total startups. Also, we could say the annual transition rate is pretty low. From non-employer to employer, it's just 0.86%, which means for the majority of non-employer startups, they're they're not likely to hire the first employee. And the annual exit rate is 29.85%. This number is pretty higher than for non-employer startups is over 45%, but for employer startups is much lower. The total tax burden faced by those startups is 4.96% of value added, and the total incentive rate is 0.95% of value added. For the methodology part, first, we aggregate data to county year level data, and we apply differences approach using state level policy change over time. How we define the trade? We define the trade using the large policy increase or decrease. A large increase is defined as the top 5% of distribution of changes, and a large decrease is the reverse one, is the bottom 5% of distribution changes. Because we have the differential timing of treatment, we apply the Corwin and Santa Ana DID, and also we only use not yet treated counties as controls. Also, we use matching and regression adjustment using AA robust. The A1 study analysis is used to check the parallel trains assumption and also check the dynamic effect. So to validate before I start the migration results, I want to start the first column, the policy. To validate the CSDID method, we tested the first stage relationship between the large increases or decreases in policy and the corresponding policy outcome itself. The results shows the change in policy variables following large increases and decreases are highly significant as expected. For example, for this number is the coefficient is 0.52. And this is the A1 study for this, the first stage analysis. It means an average increase in total taxes by 0.52 percent point of value added. So this is we put the first stage estimation in the first column. And then go ahead to the main results, we find the total tax increase could discourage startups, like the total tax increase could decrease the employer startups by 5.46% and decrease the employment by 6.4%, also decrease the non-employer startups. For all these total tax policies, corporate income tax is the most important one. It decreased the employer startups and also the non-employer startups. This is the A1 study plots for the taxes increases. You could say the tax has an immediate effect. If we increase the tax, it has an immediate effect on employer startups, and also similar for the corporate income tax. If we increase, it could be effective in the first year of the policy announcement. What happens for the tax cuts? We find that tax cuts has the symmetric effect for the startup outcomes. The total taxes would increase the total employment by 4.55%. And also we find the corporate income tax could increase the employer and the employment. For personal income tax rate, it has a larger effect on non-employer startups. It's intuitive because for those non-employers, they face personal income tax. They usually work as like gig workers or just solo entrepreneurs. So they pay for the personal income tax, not the corporate income tax. For the incentives, we find the incentives has a positive effect on the employer and the employment. It increased the employer by 4.21% and the employment by 5.24%. R&D tax credits are a star in our results. State that big R&D here. States that beefed up R&D incentives saw about a 7% jump in the number of new employer businesses and in the jobs those startups created. That's a big effect. It suggests that if you make it cheaper to innovate, you will get more tech and science-oriented folks saying, "Okay, let's do this startups thing." So similarly, investment tax credits here. Think of this as breaks for investing in equipment or capital. Give a smaller but still meaningful bump on the order of 2% more new firms. Here is the event study plot for the incentive increases. Because from the previous event study plot, we could say the tax has an immediate effect, but for the incentives, actually they have a delayed effect. For the total incentive increase, it starts to work in the 5th year, and also for the investment tax credits, it's become significant in the 3rd year and the 6th year. So for the incentives, it may have a lagged effect. We do have some interesting heterogeneity analysis. The first one is we discuss the distance to state borders. We discuss the state competition in policy. So startups might relocate to a neighboring county just across the state line with a state policy, but in the mean regression results, we don't say there is a significant effect on the move-out rate. So this motivates our heterogeneity analysis for the border and the interior counties to say if the border counties has a more significant effect, so it could provide some evidence for the relocation effect. As shown in this figure, the counties with dark blue colors are those border counties, and the counties with light blue are those interior counties, and those with white is just not included in our sample. So we separate our sample into 2 types: the border counties and interior counties, and we run the regression for each sample, and we find no evidence of relocation. You could say, as shown in this figure, the confidence interval for both border counties and interior counties, most confidence interval just overlapped. So we could not find significant difference between the reaction of those border counties and interior counties. So we say there is no evidence of relocation, and we say the policy changes increase or decrease the total number of startups rather than shifting activity across state borders. And this figure shows the total incentive increase and total incentive decreases. Still, we could say the confidence interval are overlapped for those border counties and interior counties. The second heterogeneity analysis is the industry heterogeneity, because we think some policies may target some specific industry, like the sales tax may have a larger effect on retail industry, like these things. And we do find some evidence to support this, like the sales tax increase has a larger effect on retail, on the startup outcomes in retail industry. And we say the employment decrease significantly compared with the baseline results. The baseline results, we find the sales tax increase has no effect on the employment for all industries. And also the manufacturing industry, the property tax decrease has a positive effect on employer startups in manufacturing industry. And if we compare the effect with the baseline effect, we find it increased by 2%. So we could say the effects are stronger where taxes directly hit the sector. The third heterogeneity analysis is the policy timing. So we distinguish between the new introductions and the incremental changes. Why we focus on this? Because new introductions is kind of 0 to 1. Incremental changes is the 1 to infinity. These two types may tell different stories. But during our research period, 2001-2015, most policies has been established before, and there is no introductions like the corporate income tax, personal income tax, or some the total incentives. But for these two policies, R&D tax credits and job creation tax credits, they do have some introductions, and it account for 44 to 48% of large increases. So we just focus on those large increases. And the R&D credit introduction increased the non-employer startups by 2.35% and increased the employer startups by 7.51%. And this effect is stronger than the policy expansion and is larger than the baseline results. For the job creation tax credits introduction, it increased the employer startups by 4.86% and increased the employment by 7.32%. And the last heterogeneity analysis is the growth ambition indicators of startups. One comment we received from the previous conference is how we distinguish the non-employer, because the non-employer startups is complicated. It includes some gig workers, and also it includes some startups, just 2 or 3 founders, but in high-tech industry. So these two types are different stories. How we identify the non-employer with growth ambition. We keep non-employers with employer identification number, the EIN. And the EIN non-employers are those with growth ambition. If you check this table, we could find the total tax decrease the non-employer with EIN startups by 2.24%, and the total incentive increase those groups by 8.03%. This is a large effect. Actually, we find the EIN non-employers response become closer to employer startups. Also, the EIN non-employers account for 20% of the total non-employer startups, and the left 8% non-employers are those without EIN. You could say some like maybe some gig workers or Uber drivers, like this person. For robustness check, the first robustness check we think is the cross-policy correlation, because our analysis is at the county level, there would be some concurrent event at the county at the same time. So what we do is we regress each policy increase and decrease to other policies, and each cell here show the regression results. And also for all these regressions, we have the event study plots. You could say the most policies are not correlated with other policies, but still there would be some like property tax has a high correlation with the property tax abatement, such things. And the majority policies has no correlation with other concurrenting policies. Also, even though we find there is no significant correlation between the different policies, we still control some concurrenting policies in the regression because the Corway and Santa Ana DID does not allow us to use the time varying control variables. So we change to use the stacked DID composed by chains in 2019 to add time varying controls for other policies. And when we find the estimates with and without policy controls are pretty similar. Also, in the baseline results, we define the large increase and the large decrease at 95th and 5th percentiles. And one robustness check, we use alternative large change thresholds. We define large as 99th and the 1st and 90th, 10th percentiles. And we find the results broadly consistent. The total tax increase will decrease the employer startup and the employment, and the total tax decrease will decrease the exit rate for startups. So let me take a summary. This is the first analysis of the effects of comprehensive set of taxes and incentives on startup outcomes. We use 5 taxes and 4 incentives to put them in one framework and to compare the effect on startup outcomes. And also, we use novel data on the universe of startups in the United States. We find the higher taxes will lead to fewer startups. The corporate income tax and the property tax income has the more significant effect on the employer startups, and the personal income tax has a more significant on non-employer startups. The incentive effect, we find the higher incentives has a larger effect on it could lead to more startups, especially for R&D credits and investment tax credits. We find there is no relocation effect. The move-out rate for almost all regressions are not significant. Also, we find the estimates for those border counties and interior counties are not significantly different. So we think there is no relocation effect, and the policy change will lead to the increase or decrease in the startups, and not shifting across state borders. Also, we find there is a stronger effect for new introductions and directly exposed industries like retail and manufacturing. So the policy implications, we provide some evidence-based guidance for policymakers. We compare different policies. Also, we consider startups, the employer and non-employer startups, when designing tax policies, especially for incentives. Actually, non-employer startups account for the majority of startups, is nearly 90%. But so the policymakers should consider to design some specific targeted to this type of startups. Also, we have a border effect that suggests importance of tax competition for startups between states, because now we don't find some significant effect on the state border competition. Okay, I think I finished earlier.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Danny. Go ahead and please take it
Okay,
over.
let me share my screen and just give me a thumbs up if you see it.
We're good to go.
Good. Okay. All right, everybody. My name is Danny Kim, assistant professor at the Wharton School, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me to talk about the paper. I had a lot of fun reading it, and thank you, Kay, for such a good, comprehensive presentation. So I'm going to spend very little time on the presentation itself, in the summary, because Kay has done a really good job covering a lot of ground in a little time. And then I'll focus my time on three set of comments that are a bit more high level and hopefully can help the paper move along. So the summary here, the paper is asking how do changes in taxes and incentives impact entrepreneurial entry. The data, there are two ingredients. The first one is this amazing startup data called the CSP, developed by some of the co-authors in the paper. It's the universe of young US employers in the United States, and that includes both employers and non-employer businesses in the span of 20 years. And they're getting it from the Census Bureau's LBD and ILBD. The other ingredient is the panel database on incentives and taxes by Tim Bartik at the Upjohn Institute. And this is just a terrific public use data on set of incentives and taxes in the United States between 1990 and 2015. There's a lot of things that are covered here. The authors, I think, are covering these sets of changes. So at the tax level, they're looking at income tax changes, property tax, and sales tax. I think they're excluding location-specific tax for, I think, good reasons. And incentives, there's a wide range of things that are in play here. So it is going to include property tax abatements, job creation tax credits, investment tax credits, R&D tax credits, and job training subsidies that Kay also covered in her presentation. The main findings, and there's, I think, many findings to this paper, but in my simple and quick read of the paper, there are two that really stand out to me. The first one, if I were to summarize the main points, would be tax cuts tend to boost entrepreneurial entry. It increases employment and also reduces failures among these young firms. The second result would be increased incentives, whether it's R&D tax credit or other forms of incentives for these young employers, also boost entrepreneurial entry and has a weaker but significant relationship on employment increase and reductions in failures. To give you a sense of what is going on under the hood, because there's so much data in play here and many different treatments that are going on in an aggregated way, here's one graph from Tim Bartik at the Upjohn Institute where he's providing the data. He's plotting here the national averages in terms of the incentives and taxes that he could cover in the last. This might actually impact entrepreneurship, where this team is really doing a phenomenal job taking on. So my read of this, so there's a lot to like in this paper. It is a very ambitious paper, right? Having a lot of different legal changes rather than focusing and isolating just one set of change. In tax incentives, they're using just amazing data of US startups based on administrative records over the last 2 decades. And it builds on this really important and emerging literature on entry regulations more generally in entrepreneurship. That context ranges from credit to incorporation costs and other types of regulatory costs that can be spread to the entrepreneur. But here, the authors have much richer data. They bring to bear a lot of the precision with the new methods, right, into the data. And it's a really policy relevant question, right? And many theoretical implications underlying those results as well. And I think basically in a nutshell, it's like asking the question for any regional policymaker, like what lever can I pull to actually get more entrepreneurship in my region? My comments are going to be less about empirical tidbits because I thought the specifications and just the care of their approach was really phenomenal. I just have three high-level comments that I hope will help the authors really deepen the contribution and the novelty of the paper. The first one's going to be about the fit between the motivation, right, and the empirical kind of apparatus here. The second one is going to be about the level of analysis because we're operating at such a high level with many different treatments in play. The third one is going to be thinking more about the post-entry performance effects at the intensive margin. On the first one, the framing is really common, right? In terms of how we think about entrepreneurship research, why it's important, and what really animates in terms of us doing the kinds of research and innovation on entrepreneurship, which is that it's so important for generating job creation, innovation, right, and growth in the economy. And clearly so, right? That is a phenomenal framing to have. And the authors also have this framing in the page one of the paper. But what I want to bring, and I think some of the comments we're dealing with this too, is that entrepreneurship, as we know, is also very much a right tail phenomenon. And what I mean by this is that not all startups are equal in their contribution to the economy. So here's one graph from Guzman and Stern. They're doing a prediction exercise, right, of the quality of startups and which ones are going to have this large liquidity exit or IPO or big M&A. And here basically is showing the top 5 percentile of these firms in terms of their quality score are accounting for more than half of the growth outcomes in this space. And the right-hand side is another paper of ours that shows in this paper about natives and immigrants and the startups they found. And here what we're showing on a log scale is this distribution, right, and the prevalence of these companies. And what you're basically seeing in this linear curve, given the log scale, is that very, very, very much of the action in terms of job creation is driven by just a tiny share of these companies contributing in a disproportionate way. So I would love to see more effort to really uncover this world, right? So they are doing the non-employer versus employer distinction. I think that's a really helpful starting point, but they have so much more data to bear. And I would love to see just more of the heterogeneity among the latter, which is the growth orientation among employer businesses. One practical way here is Goldschlag and Miranda exactly using the same underlying data set of LBD that the authors are using. At the NAICS 4 level, they actually provide a high-tech industry classification. And this is more of an input rather than output measure because they're using STEM workers allocation in the economy to measure which of these industries, right, are high-tech versus not high-tech. Some examples here, right, are aerospace, software, data processing, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors. So very much the kinds of businesses that we might think about as a prototypical entrepreneurial firm in terms of driving job creation. And of course, on average, they're going to have very different set of outcomes compared to, say, small restaurants and dentist offices, which are important parts of the economy, but they're not going to have the same growth outcome on average compared to this sector. So I think this is something that the authors can, I think, easily implement in the paper. The second point is about the aggregation of the analysis. So the beauty of the paper is that they can loop together many, many different policy changes into one really beautiful aggregate analysis. But here, the feature and the bug is that we miss out on the heterogeneity there. And I think just taking a step back overall, I'm very convinced, right, with your empirics, with the care that you've put into your analysis, that the direction and the size of the estimates are really, really convincing. But it's also the case that these effects are in line with our expectation. Like we give more incentives, we cut taxes. Of course, we would expect more entrepreneurial entry. And in fact, that is probably part of the policy design. And I would love to see where are the cases where that doesn't work? Where are the surprising or unexpected cases where we might see the policy changes to have more of a muted effect? And I think that could give more color to some of the more novel mechanisms that we can uncover through your data. So I think one practical tool you can use is the specification curve that Simonson et al. In the Nature paper developed, where you can literally plot every single policy change and the estimated effect on a curve. And you can see, right, like actually the null results can be really compelling here to better understand when a particular policy change doesn't work in the way that we expect. The third and last final comment that I have is being more curious about the intensive margin, which is thinking about beyond entry, how do we think about growth of these companies? And one helpful specification that the authors have is log employment. But here it's helpful, but it doesn't quite answer that question because it's aggregated. So it's really hard to tell if you have captured employment in a region year cell, whether that's being driven by a handful of firms that are driving like some of the right tail effects versus all boats being lifted kind of effect. So I think it would be really cool if you guys can dig into some of the distributional outcomes in terms of the high growth firms and not so high growth firms in terms of the outcomes. To motivate some of that is I'm going to just give you one quick illustration from our forthcoming paper. So we're looking at firm growth over the last 45, 50 years in the United States. And what's really interesting here is that firm growth is really declining for young firms. So this is the intensity of high growth firms for all firms in the United States. And basically where young firms are, the dark bar, there's been a large decline, perhaps more alarmingly so compared to other groups. And in tandem, we're seeing not just young firms, but all types of firms being more likely to be stagnant, which is actually showing very little to zero growth. So I think one big question that comes out of this is, can your paper about regulations and tax changes give us some answer of why we're seeing declining growth prospects among young firms, especially? And I think you have all the kind of ingredients to be able to answer that question. And I think the underlying question there would be, are marginal startups that respond right to these changes and therefore are started, are they systematically worse than those that would have started anyway? And I think theoretically the answer is yes, but maybe there are many reasons to think that these companies, despite the liquidity constraints that were resolved right with these incentive changes, perhaps they would still be very promising and on the same trajectory as the other firms that would have been there anyway. I think kind of getting an answer to these marginal firms would be really interesting and important. I think one practical suggestion on this would be looking at the size distribution of these companies over time for those that were started before and after the policy change. So those are the three comments that I have. Again, really ambitious paper. You're exploiting a lot of rich set of policy changes using just amazing data. So thank you for doing this. And I look forward to seeing what the authors and the rest of the participants have to say.